I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for December the 3rd, 2025. Today on our Theology Roundup, we will be discussing the issue of the oracles of God from Romans chapter 3. And I didn't realize this last night when I was putting together the main thing that I tweet or post to Facebook. But here's the tweet I sent out on X earlier today. It got more traction on Facebook. Jewish literature like the Dead Sea Scrolls, pseudepigrapha, Philo, Josephus, Mishnah, Tosefta, Talmud, and Midrashim do have a place in the theology of today's Messianics. So do some of the writings from emerging Christianity in the early 2nd to 4th centuries. So do bodies of literature from the ancient Near East or the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. These types of materials all have a useful secondary or tertiary place as history, philosophy, commentary. How we might use them depends what issue we are examining, but canonical Holy Scripture still represents the final word. And of course, when you post something like that, you do get a variety of responses, but on the whole, people were in agreement. This kind of literature has a place in theology, but Holy Scripture is where the ultimate authority is to be found. And how and when you use this ultimately depends on what issue you are examining. All right, so as I said, we will be reviewing Romans 3, 1 and 2, and the issue of the oracles of God. Some of you are aware by now that we have just completed updating our Romans for the Practical Messianic Commentary. This was released originally over 10 years ago. It's now been updated for the 2020s. Some arguments have been smoothed over a little bit. It's taken into account some new developments in the Messianic sphere of influence. So if you don't have a copy of Romans for the Practical Messianic, it's available in both paperback as well as ebook. And you know it's the updated version because of the blue-green cover, not the maroon cover. All right, now we're going to switch windows over, and we're going to have this teaching taken directly from Romans 3, 1 and 2. All right, there we go. Romans 3. Romans 3, 1 and 2. Then what advantage has the Jew, or what is the benefit of circumcision? Much in every way. First of all, that they were entrusted with the oracles of God. Deuteronomy 4, 7 and 8. Psalm 103, 7, 147, 19, and 20. Messianic Apologetics Revised Version, which is adapted from the public domain World Messianic Bible. And as these commentaries, of course, get up to date, you'll see this Marv version used as the author's rendering version for the commentary. Okay. Romans 3, 1. With the material of Romans chapter 2, having just explained how the Jewish people are every bit as much sinners as the nations at large, and that possession of the Torah will not merit some sort of special favors before God, Paul now needed to address how God was not unfair in his dealings with his own Jewish people. Yet, even if Jewish people are sinners the same as the pagans, and they need redemption too, this does not all of a sudden mean that there is no special distinction in being Jewish. While circumcision of the heart is something which every Jewish person must have to be considered a true Jew. Romans 2:28 and 29. It is not as though physical circumcision has no important value to it. Being a first century Jewish person, descended from the patriarch Abraham and the ancient Israelites who stood at the base of Mount Sinai, is indeed something of significant value and importance. And perhaps more important, as Yeshua himself said, is salvation is from the Jews. John 4:22, New American Standard. And Paul himself was a Jewish believer who took the implications of this very, very seriously in his ministry, as it is arguably the most important distinct trait of the Jewish people. It is widely recognized that what is seen in Romans chapter 3 was issued in the form of diatribe. According to John R.W. Stott, quote, Paul's method of handling Jewish objections to his teaching takes the form of a diatribe, a literary convention well known to the ancient world. In it, a teacher would set up a dialogue with his critics or students, first posing and then answering their questions, unquote. This is going to be especially important to keep in mind per various approaches to Romans 3, 7, and 8. Rhetorically, in this piece of Paul's composition, it needs to be weighed whether or not Paul even used the first person to talk about himself or someone more or less hypothetical. And indeed, some of the discussion of Romans chapter 7 widely agreed by examiners to not be the Apostle Paul speaking autobiographically. Okay. Paul opened this section to the Romans, obviously directed to the Jewish believers. Then what is the advantage of being Jewish? Or what is the benefit of circumcision? Romans 3:1, Tree of Life version. Here, he employed the term ophaleia, often meaning utility, use, profit, advantage, benefit, from the Liddell Scott lexicon, with the verb ophaleo having been previously used in Romans 2:25. For indeed, circumcision is of value, ophaleo, if you practice the law, New American Standard. Even though circumcision was insufficient to claim special favors before God and would not at all assure Jewish people a place in the kingdom to come, Paul did have to interject that Jewish circumcision did indeed possess a special value to be properly noted, which he would pick up on later in his letter, Romans 9, 4, and 5. Romans 3:2. Being Jewish and circumcised does bring with it some important distinction, according to the Apostle Paul. As he asserted, much in every way, to begin with, the Jews are entrusted with the oracles of God. Romans 3:2, Revised Standard Version. While this is doubtlessly important, it has to be recognized how the verb pisteuo, often meaning something like to have faith, is employed here for entrusted, Revised Standard Version, New Revised Standard, English Standard Version, New American Standard, New International Version, today's New International Version, with committed, King James, New King James, a rather poor rendering. This is because, as James R. Edwards explains, quote, Paul does not say that God gave his words to Israel, but that God entrusted them to Israel. This shifts the emphasis from ownership to stewardship, from possession of the law to responsibility to it, unquote. Edwards points readers' attention to the Isaiah 49:6 mandate of Israel being a light to the world. What did Paul specifically intend by saying that ancient Israel and the first century Jewish community were entrusted with the oracles of God, ta logia tu theou? The Theological Dictionary of the New Testament asserts in Romans 3:2, the divine logia are specifically, but not exclusively, God's promises to Israel. And this could involve any number of things, mainly involving God formally delivering the Torah to ancient Israel, Deuteronomy 4:8, 5:22 to 27, excuse me, Psalm 147:20, Acts 7:38. While certainly including his instruction, the oracles of God may also be viewed as the anticipation announced by the prophets of the Messiah to come, and was something to surely affect the world at large. The oracles of God has even been approached from the wide perspective of God's self-revelation involved with his plan of salvation history. It cannot go overlooked how logia can also involve various supernatural utterances. Numbers 24:16, Septuagint, 1 Peter 4:11. With this in mind, while many readers of Romans 3:2 assume things like ta logia to theou, involving the Tanakh scriptures, Old Testament, the singular term logos has a wide variety of applications, including things which are chiefly oral, from the BDAG lexicon. Now you'll see how this connects to what I tweeted earlier. What if Paul actually included in his statements of Romans 3:1 and 2 that the Jewish people, in addition to obviously being entrusted with the instruction and messianic promises of God, were also granted the oral explanations of how much of God's instruction was to be properly followed? Many of these traditional explanations could have made their way into Jewish literature like the Mishnah, Tosefta, Talmud, Midrashim, and even Dead Sea Scrolls, which examiners today generally all consult as containing important background material as at least historical witnesses to ancient opinions. Readers see later on in Romans 9:3 and 4 how Paul would speak of my people, my own flesh and blood, who are Israelites. To them belong the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the Torah and the temple service and the prophets. Tree of Life version. The term latreia largely relates to cultic worship. Historically speaking, the synagogue has certainly preserved many traditional liturgies, hymns, and psalms, not necessarily present in the book of Psalms, originally used in temple worship, which have made their way into the Siddur or prayer book. Taken together, the Jewish people have historically been given the responsibility of preserving the protocol of proper worship and mainline Torah halakha. Yeshua himself actually bid his disciples to follow the lead of the Pharisees, Matthew 23:1 and 2, even though he did warn them about some of the leaders' hypocrisy, Matthew 23:3. Because of Judah's leadership affirmed in the Torah, Genesis 49:10, the Jewish people do get to determine a wide degree of the proper way of how the commandments of the Torah are to be interpreted. Today's Messianics should follow and certainly expel efforts to be knowledgeable of many of the Jewish interpretations of Moses' teaching. Now listen very carefully. Does this mean that the rabbinical authorities are to be blindly followed in all matters? Of course not. No astute and intelligent Bible reader thinks that Paul instructing believers to follow the government later in Romans chapter 13 means that human laws which are in flat defiance of God's will are to be followed. Similarly, any applications of God's Torah seen in the Jewish theological tradition need to be spiritually edifying. As Philippians 4:8 would say, whatever things are true, whatever things are honorable, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Tree of Life version. And be compatible with his mandate of Israel making a difference in the world. Genesis 12:2 and 3, Deuteronomy 4, 5 through 8. There are Jewish views of the Tanakh scriptures which clearly do subtract from the good news and which disregard the messiahship of Yeshua, which are to surely be disregarded. Yet, one can clearly recognize that the apostles affirmed that the Jewish religious leadership of their day had an authority, what today we should best call a consultative authority, alongside that of leaders in the body of Messiah. Matthew 16:19, not to be so casually dismissed. Many of the traditions Judaism has preserved can be considered Spirit-inspired to some degree. As with all issues, though, discernment and wisdom from the Holy Spirit should be able to identify those things which subtract from Yeshua and his atoning work. Much of today's Messianic Judaism has rightfully recognized various areas of Jewish Torah practice where Yeshua's ministry and teachings and the thrust of the good news clearly stand in contrast. The majority of Messianic Judaism does not follow an orthodox level of Torah observance, but one closer to contemporary conservative or Reform Judaism. All right, so the oracles of God, probably not the last time we're going to be talking about this, but while I would agree with those who would say, the Jewish people were given the responsibility of preserving the Tanakh scriptures, the Old Testament, I think it's something which is a little more involved with that, with proposals ranging from they were given the Messianic promises to, we may even say, various oral explanations given regarding how various Torah instructions are to be followed. Things which may have later ended up in various bodies of Jewish literature. Now, that is not to say that there has been an unbroken oral Torah from Mount Sinai. I think that goes way too far. But what it can mean is that various bodies of extra-biblical literature have some role to play in our theology. And I think that is something which we do need to keep in mind. All right, so let me switch windows back really quickly. Okay, and once again, this has been taken from our updated Romans for the Practical Messianic Commentary. And the reason you know it's updated is because it's in the blue-green cover. And we are continuing, of course, on our updates of various older publications. Galatians for the Practical Messianic is one I need to return to. That'll probably be available sometime in the first quarter or so of 2026. And a lot of this is to account for how there have been various changes witnessed in the Messianic community over the past 10 to 20 years. And what are we anticipating possibly for the future as well? That is something we definitely have to take into consideration. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup. Starting tomorrow for Theology Roundup, we're going to start a multi-part series. I'm not sure how many parts it's going to be, but we're going to be discussing what is the new covenant. And that involves not only a series of introductions, but also examining Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hebrews, and some other places where the issue of the new covenant definitely comes into focus. So you'll not want to miss that. It'll definitely be something which goes into next week. All right, so let's shift over now to our news roundup. And of course, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is something which is time sensitive and it changes from day to day. And we are reminded, number one, pray for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, pray for peace, Russia, Ukraine. And number three, pray for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. So we've got a number of stories to go through. These links will be available for you to look at later today when this episode is archived. at messianicapologetics.net. There you can read the articles in greater detail and take a look at the different clips, etc. Okay, our first story, this is from yesterday, December the 2nd. Open source intel. Indirect negotiations between Israel and Hezbollah with Egypt as the mediator are going to prevent a new war in Lebanon, from chapter 14. It's going to be channel 14. Okay, we do, of course, while we've seen a ceasefire in Gaza, there's the issue in Lebanon. There's also the issue in Syria. These are ongoing things, but we don't see them with the same intensity as we saw the Israel-Gaza conflict. From Charisma. Okay, this is from yesterday, December the 2nd. Is Christmas a pagan holiday? 10 biblical truths every Christian must know. Okay, so you all can read this article, flip through it in your spare time. But here you see one reason, which is getting a lot of people who were not doing Christmas to go back to it. December 25 was chosen for theology, not paganism. I have mentioned this before. Early Christians chose December the 25th because they believed that Jesus was conceived on March 25th. Add 9 months to March the 25th, you have December the 25th. These early Christians connected Jesus' birth to theology, not pagan festivals like Saturnalia. Pagan celebrations gravitated toward December the 25th as Christianity grew, contrary to what most people believe. So that would mean that December the 25th was a misunderstanding, not paganism repurposed. So we're going to celebrate the birth of Jesus on a day for misunderstanding, not for paganism reclaimed by God's people. Okay, so you got a number of different things here. Okay, here's one, number 8, Christmas trees are not demonic. Well, some fear that Christmas trees are demonic. This is not true. We do not worship the tree. Instead, it is placed as a reminder of how Christ came into the world. Now, this is what's getting a lot of people who once had ceased doing Christmas to return. Jeremiah chapter 10 is about carving an idol from wood. It's about shaping it with tools, decorating it with silver and gold, and worshiping it as God. That's not what people do with Christmas trees. Christmas trees are believed to have begun in Germany among Christians in the 1500s. They used a star to remember the Star of Bethlehem, an angel to remember angels, and the lights to remember Jesus as the light of the world. Okay, and then finally, reason 10, freedom, unity, and worship matter most. If someone does or does not want to celebrate the holiday, that is their choice, and we are to leave it up to them to do what they believe is best. Okay, and I do agree with that. One of the big problems I've got with the Christmas tree, if you put paganism and all claims of that aside, and Jeremiah chapter 10, while it gets a lot of people to ask questions, it is about taking wood, carving it into an idol, and overlaying it with silver and gold. But the problem with bringing a tree into the home, is it just like decorating a potted plant? How does bringing an evergreen tree into the home, how does that arise out of the story of the nativity, the actual story of the birth of Jesus? The elements are not there. And of course, you go to Bethlehem, the flora and fauna is not there. So this is why I stress to people, ultimately, it does come down to, when you see the different sides of the argument and you see how some people were really hard and fast, Christmas is pagan, and then they see some reasons like this, and well, maybe we can, at least celebrate it with our extended family now and not be jerks about it. Okay, I do believe we don't need to be jerks about it, but it ultimately comes down to how the apostles did not do Christmas on December the 25th, and the apostolic successors didn't do it on December the 25th, and that does not get enough play. And how authentic do we want to have our faith practice today? I mean, this is right. This is why I have to say, look, you can politely decline from Christmas, say no thank you, and move on. Because right now, of course, the big battle is replacement theology, the Israel-Gaza conflict, and weighing the fallout of that. Okay, from Open Source Intel. This is from yesterday, December the 2nd, 3:42 p.m. Pope Leo XIV to Al Jazeera. I have read the letter from Hezbollah and prefer not to comment. I advise the groups to lay down their weapons and pursue diplomatic discussion. Okay, because the Pope recently did make a visit to Lebanon. And in this case, it just raises the question, as people anticipate some kind of end time scenario, what participation is the Vatican, the papacy, going to play in that end time scenario? It's a lot of speculation there. From Visegrad 24, yesterday, 3:11 p.m., and there's a 36-second clip. Trump says that any country suspected of trafficking drugs to the United States is subject to attack, not just Venezuela. So we do pray for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. By extension, that means the Western Hemisphere. You know, we've heard a lot of, what's this conflict that's building in Venezuela, what it's all about. We've heard everything from drugs to Trump wants to neutralize Russian, Chinese, and Iranian influence in the Western Hemisphere. And while I'm sure drug trafficking is a big part of this, there are other countries in Latin America who are looking on and wondering what is going on here. And probably one of the biggest countries which is looking on, which is their president has already expressed solidarity with Nicolas Maduro, is Mexico. So we don't know, but we do know that whether it's Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia, wherever, there are sincere believers. There are indeed Messianic communities in some of these places, and they need our prayers, and we need to have faith and trust that the Lord's will is going to prevail. And whatever threats against the American homeland need to be neutralized are neutralized, that God will protect his own. Okay, to the Russia-Ukraine situation. December the 2nd, 4:22 p.m. from Open Source Intel Defender. We know that there was a big meeting held at the Kremlin yesterday. Yuri Ushakov, senior aide to Russian President Putin, tells reporters after today's 5-hour-long meeting at the Kremlin with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner that the meeting was useful, constructive, and meaningful, but that no compromise plan has been agreed to yet for Ukraine, stating that some proposals are unacceptable to Russia. Additionally, Ushakov said that there are currently no plans for a second meeting between President Vladimir Putin and President Donald J. Trump. Okay, so, yeah. Are we just going to see endless meetings? Well, we agree on some things, we disagree on other things, while thousands of young people, both Ukrainian and Russia, die every week. Also from Open Source Intel, 5:00 p.m. yesterday, reposting something that Donald Trump put on his Truth Social platform. Excuse me. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that all documents Joe Biden signed with an auto pen are hereby null, void, and of no further force or effect. Okay? What are we going to do about this whole auto pen deal? Back to Russia, Ukraine, and there's a 2-minute, 16-second clip. This is from Sky News. Breaking, a Kremlin aide says that while talks with U.S. representatives were constructive, very useful, and substantive, they are no closer to resolving the war in Ukraine. Okay, 4 more stories to go. Fox News, this is only, resending out what we just mentioned regarding the auto pen, but here you see the photo of the portrait of the auto pen that's in the White House with Joe Biden's signature. So that's definitely going to get a lot of people stirred on Capitol Hill. Okay. All right, here's an important post from make sure I get the name right. Yes, Hen Mazig on X. I'm sure some of you all encounter this from time to time. Israel. This was sent out yesterday at 9:33 a.m., so it didn't come across my feed until after yesterday's episode. Israel is preparing for a potential wave of mass aliyah because history has taught us what happens when Jews have nowhere to go. In 1938, at the Evian Conference, 32 countries were asked if they would take in Jews fleeing Nazi persecution. Not one said yes. When Jews were forced to flee overnight, the world shut its doors. So here, today, with anti-Semitism surging worldwide, Israel refuses to let history repeat itself. And scrolling down, that is the purpose of Zionism, to ensure that if Jews are ever forced to leave again, they will never be stranded. This time, they have a home and a people ready to welcome them. And indeed, there are Messianic Jewish believers. They see this rising anti-Semitism post October the 7th, 2023. They see it definitely in Europe. They even see it here in North America, and they're wondering, what do we need to do? Now, we believe that the scriptures anticipate that in the end times, there will be a massive return of descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to the promised land. Does that mean a return down to every single person? No, but it does mean a huge enough return of people. And of course, the causes of it would be anti-Semitism, and the cause of having a Jewish homeland. The Zionist vision is ultimately, if Jews get kicked out or they're facing persecution of the countries where they live, they have a place to go to, which is a safe haven. And yes, if I were a young Messianic Jew in my 20s or 30s, I would definitely put feelers out there. What would it take for me to make Aliyah back to the home country of my ancestors? I would definitely put feelers out there. Okay, so speaking of Israel, this is an important thing which came across my feed on Instagram. Have you ever heard the claim, Israel does not exist? If you have heard that claim, this video will break it in seconds. And there are a number of, for example, the Merneptah Stela. This is something which mentions Israel living in what we consider the promised land by the 13th century BCE. That's something I learned, of course, in seminary. But there are a lot of people, because of the October the 7th, 2023 fallout, they're saying, no, this whole Israel thing, this has been made up. Israel does not have the archaeological claims it thinks it does. Well, this clip, I'll show it to you again, from Instagram, from the channel Israeli Guide. Very, very useful. I recommend you look into it. And yeah, there is a war going against Israel and the Jewish people on multiple fronts. Of course, spiritual, philosophical, political, but even it gets into biblical studies. All right, and our last story, and this is from Fox News earlier today, the 3rd of December, posted at 10:01 a.m. Tax thump. President Trump suggests tariff-driven revenue could allow for the historic elimination of the federal income tax under his tenure, marking the most ambitious overhaul of the American tax system in more than a century. Okay, now we don't tend to talk about economic stuff that much on Messianic Insider, but if it's a really big one, we'll mention it. We know from the beginning of Trump's second term, he said so in his inaugural address at the rotunda in the Capitol, that the golden age of America has begun. And for a lot of us, what does that golden age mean? Does it mean that, for example, a lot of prophecy people seeing what took place in Israel, at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, he's got, his negotiators going around the world trying to solve different hot climates. I mean that politically, cut peace deals, cut peace treaties. Russia, Ukraine is, probably the biggest, the most complicated of them all. People have taken golden age of America as, Trump could be the beast, or he's at least setting the stage for the beast. Others think golden age, well, we're going to see more economic fiscal responsibility, a return of manufacturing, return of American jobs, an economic explosion, paying down the national debt. And this is the kind of story, Trump wanting to say, maybe tariff income will eliminate the need for federal income tax. That would be in this bracket over here. Now, how much of that's actually possible? I'm sure we'd all here in the US are like, yeah, we don't want to have to pay federal income tax. This is great. How much of it is possible? How much of it is just rhetoric? We will have to wait and see. But that is something worthy of note. All right, and so that concludes our news roundup for today. And once again, starting tomorrow, we're going to start a multi-part series. Don't know how many parts it's going to be, but it's going to take us well into next week for certain, on what is the new covenant. And that is something many of you have been asking me about. On behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee Moment shorts, and generally speaking, you can take a look at our different ministry adventures over the years. Please do leave a thumbs up or heart for this live stream. It'll definitely help its exposure on social media. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you. Shalom and take care.